James A. Anderson is Professor Emeritus of Cognitive Science and Brain Science at Brown University. His multidisciplinary background includes expertise in psychology, biology, physics, neuroscience, and computer science. He received his BS and Ph.D. degree from MIT. His research on applications of neural networks have been instrumental to the field of cognitive science, as well as numerous business applications. His neural networks have been applied to models of human concept formation, decision-making, speech perception, and models of vision. One particular project has been development of dynamical systems models, arithmetical computation. His work has spawned numerous companies, most notably Simply, an early search engine that offered word sense disambiguation search term. He received the Information Science Award at the Joint Conference on Information Sciences in 2002. Well, Tim, that's pretty impressive. So, how did you get into the field?
Well, I basically couldn't avoid it. That's the only problem that seemed of interest to me. In high school, I was a science fiction reader, a gadgeteer, a large hand in the UA. Anyway, I always felt that if you couldn't understand how the world and the mind worked, you didn't know much of anything. So I felt that learning more about that was something worthwhile. And I mentioned that I was very interested in Isaac Asimov's Foundation series, and I wanted to be Hari Seldon, who was a psychohistorian. But nobody had courses in psychohistory that I could find in the course catalogs, so I figured I'd go to MIT and learn physics, which seemed like a default position. I'm pleased to report that Paul Krugman, the economist, had a somewhat similar background. So, and I've run across a few others too. So Isaac Asimov had an impact on the education of the youth. Okay, so anyway, I went to MIT, learned about physics. Didn't do that well in it. I was not that great a physicist. So I decided I'd do number two, which is neuroscience, which I did. And neuroscience led into psychology and cognitive science. And the trick is to balance them all so they work together, which is not entirely
true. I have a question about what you're getting into right now. What are people doing right or wrong in AI?
Well, first of all, they mostly aren't doing AI. They're doing pattern association. If you look back at the original definitions of AI from the 1950s, the idea was to do cognition the way humans do it. And that was the initial manifesto from the Dartmouth meeting. And I think there's a lot to recommend it because we're constrained by our tools. We have these wonderful digital computers, very powerful, very essential, but they work on mechanisms that are totally alien to the machinery the brain uses. And if you mimic the brain in some genuine sense, you would do things in a quite different way. Real brains work with slow, relatively inaccurate, but widely connected neural structures. Computers work with logic-based, very fast units that work by doing millions of things one after the other in serial. So brains tend to work with large, slow, parallel operations of immense power, and computers work with very fast, logic-based operations. Each operation has very little power. They get their strength in combination. And we tend to take the less valuable aspects of our tools and carry over to explain other systems. Like the old saying about if all you have is a hammer, the whole world is full of nails. And that people learn digital computers. I love digital computers, but they're not brain models. And I believe since I was, in MIT, that the better model for brains is a transistor radio because it has the same problems, relatively slow, working with discrete structures, slow by digital standards, and with a whole lot of constraints on signal processing that are intrinsic to intrinsic to radios. Now, these are analog radios, by the way, not things like nearness, for example, have natural explanations. And in the analog domain, nearness does not have a natural explanation in the digital domain. Logic is either true or false. And you can program it to do nearness, but it's not the same thing. It's not natural. And that's why I like systems that naturally do what they're supposed to do. And I think if we get a combination analog brain-like computer and a digital computer-like computer, we've already got something. And that again is a research project for the next generation. That would answer a whole lot of questions. We get the strengths of both systems instead of working with the weaknesses of both systems, which is what we do now.
I'd like to ask what advice you would give to a new researcher just coming into the field.
Well, the first rule is to be young. I think people have pointed out that you really can't be an expert until you devote about a decade to working on a set of problems. There are some areas you can be brilliant, like mathematics and music, but that's not typical of data-rich environments like cognitive science and psychology. You just got to know a lot of stuff. So you have to not be narrow, you have to be wide. And most of the education and granting agencies these days give you points for being narrow, deep and narrow, whereas being broad and shallow might in some respects be better. That's more brain-like. Not too accurate, but able to approximately integrate over wide areas. So the first thing you have to do is learn mathematics to some degree of excellence, not too much. And abstract mathematics is not of much use dealing with biology, but things like differential equations and that sort of stuff really are. You got to know some neuroscience to make you appreciate how odd our brain tissue is and how beautiful it is and the way it works. And my Ph.D. is actually in neuroscience. And I just love doing experiments in neuroscience. They're great fun. They tend not to be doing anything like what you'd like to do, but they're still interesting. So neuroscience is very seductive. It's so much fun doing the experiments that you sort of lose track of why you're doing them in the first place, which is to understand how the brain works in some general computational sense. So I like neuroscience. Cognitive science is something that people interested in mathematics and physics don't usually get much of because it's what people in another building on campus tend to do. But in fact, if you figure the whole point of the nervous system in humans, one of the major functions is to generate cognition. That's the output of the system. And if you didn't know what cognition looked like, you didn't know the properties of cognition, you have basically a system that's all input and very weak specifications of the outputs. And that's why you have to know a little bit about a lot. And I think that's the essential mindset to use. At least that's what I think.
Over your long career, what did you have the most fun doing?
Well, that's a good question. I think working with these systems And I'm kind of a computer geek, and computing away is really kind of fun, especially when the models work the way they're supposed to, which doesn't happen often enough. So you get infrequent rewards with a good computer program, and you say, wow, look at my computer program, and people say, big deal. So anyway, that's fun. And having models in cognitive science that actually explain data, which I've had a few of. Uh, you have a model, for example, for arithmetic learning. Uh, does it fit the data? And by gosh, it does.
Huh.
Uh, Experiments on list scanning, which sounds kind of dull, but if learning lists and retrieving them, people have been doing that since the 19th century. They're among the most boring experiments in the history of humanity, but they produced an incredibly good set of high quality data
Huh.
with serious structure to it. And if you can explain that kind of data with your model, you've already done something. And I did that on a couple of occasions, and it made me very happy. It's sort of like, look, I got it right. And that's a rare but satisfying experience. I recommend, kind of a pride of accomplishment, which I was pleased to be part of. Have you ever heard of a mechanism called the Antikythera mechanism, which is the first calculator? They retrieved it from a shipwreck off
yes.
the island of Antikythera.
Yes, it's
Antikythera. And the question is, it came out of nowhere. Nobody ever saw anything like it before or since. And the question is, why did they build it in the first place? It's incredibly advanced. It almost makes you believe that some kind of aliens dropped it off in the hands of a Greek who then proceeded to build it. And that's the best example I know of a true alien intervention. It's the Antikythera mechanism. But it's beautiful. It computes things, but it's of no practical importance whatsoever. But I think an early Greek artisan who put it together could have looked at it. It predicted eclipses and Olympic Games and all kinds of stuff. And he looked up at the sky and he said, yeah, we got it right. The moon is where it's supposed to be. The planets are where they're supposed to be. The eclipses occur when they said we would. That's damn good. And I could see that being a matter of great pride and accomplishment.
Yes.
And when that happens to you in science, it makes you feel good.
Yeah.
And that's a big reward.
Who were some of the people you collaborated with?
Well, I collaborated at various times with a lot of people, including Leon Cooper, a Nobel Prize winner, a number of members of our department, Kathy Spare, I'm trying to think of who, Bill Warren, any number of cognitive scientists, undergraduates. Brown really encourages undergraduates to work on research projects. Andy Knapp, who was one of the best undergraduates I ever had, and a few others, Steve Ritz. Anyway, it's been a pleasure working with these guys, and hopefully they learned something and didn't screw it up. I had at least one former student become a venture capitalist who funded some of Heck Nielsen's early company, private sector research. So when I met Oliver Kerm is his name, when I met Ollie one time, he said, and Heck Nielsen too, hey, you guys made us a lot of money. So I was very pleased. I was very pleased to have a successful student along those lines. Yeah, that was fun too. You weren't just standing up there talking and nobody was listening.
Is there anything else that we haven't covered that you'd like to get on the record?
Yeah, I think in one sense I was always kind of sad that INNS had all these personnel problems in its initial days. I'm sure you have run across some of those in in your series of interviews, I found them very discouraging. That was the first time I'd ever been involved in a scientific society, and it was really off-putting. I mean, priority issues were incredibly important. I can tell you some good stories about those. Things of a practical nature, like who's in control of the journal, who runs the meetings, what kind of stuff is in the meetings, who gives plenary talks. These are all issues that are should be sort of routine for a scientific society. Who negotiates with the hotels? If you set up a meeting of some size, and our neural network meetings around 1990 in the 90s were, a couple of thousand people sometimes. And that means you have contracts you have to negotiate with the hotels. And that's big bucks. And unless you do them right, you can really screw yourself. And one of the take-home lessons I learned, which I will now provide to you, is that don't ever try to organize a meeting without the help of a professional meeting organizer.
Oh.
And the cautionary tale I would tell is one of the members of the Board of Governors did a negotiation with a big hotel on the East Coast and signed a contract that basically would have bankrupted the society with all the penalties for not filling up the hotel with the proper number of people. And so one of the people in the Board of Governors who knew a well-known meeting organizer showed her the contract, and she said, "This is the contract they first give you when they feel you're totally ignorant." And then you look at it and you laugh and you say, let's talk reality. What can you really do for us? And then you negotiate a decent contract with proper room assignments and numbers of rooms and all that sort of thing. So that's why you've got to know the business. Expertise is important. It was thanks to the IEEE, by the way, that they bailed us out. The IEEE was very helpful. And basically we're able to get the initial contract abrogated and a reasonably business-like one put in place. But that's the 30-second version of a reason why deal with professionals when it comes to organizing things. Academics are not good at that.
What about the future of a professional INS or professional societies? What should professional societies do?
Well, professional societies, if you look at the IEEE, which is a terrific one, they publish a lot of things. Publications are great. They organize a huge number of meetings. I mean, they have hundreds of meetings a year, from small ones to big ones. That's why they can get us out of the contract, by the way, because they simply said, hey, you guys screw these people, we'll be reluctant to use you in the future for our meetings. And they understood that kind of game. So let's see, where to go. So that's a very useful function. Is publications, meetings, educational programs. These are all the standard things. One of the things that INS may have a problem with, I haven't followed them too closely recently, is neural nets are really a set of techniques. And the hard parts of technique-based systems is you end up studying the techniques and not what they're good for. So I think it's really important to realize that the combination of the techniques plus the applications are what makes for creativity. And you ought to broaden the scope of what INS does. One of the reasons I haven't read it too much is there was a period when they were having very small increments in models that were really not of that much breadth. But when people come in, like the guys from Google, give them credit, making a Go programmer, the world champion Go program. That's fantastic.
Ah,
It's a terrific application. Everybody understands it, and it makes people sit up and take notice. So good for them. Just for the basis of PR, that was a terrific accomplishment. And I think there's other applications of that type yet to come. Things like protein folding, certain kinds of predictive algorithms. These are good things. But they're combinations of a model fit into a application. And that's where I think the power of neural nets will lie. I think neural nets by themselves are fascinating, but there's lots of other areas of mathematics that are fascinating. I think it's the applications where you already see the fascination in the service of a problem. So I would recommend broadening the society to include, like the IEEE does, a huge range from theory to applications. And they do it very well and have for decades.
okay, Jim, I guess that will do us for today. So thank you very, very much for taking us on this tour of your world.
Well, it was fun. It's fun thinking about these kind of issues, going back over your past and rummaging around, see what pops up. So thanks for the opportunity.